Hello and welcome back for another episode of Ranching Reboot, your favorite regenerative ag podcast. Today I have a fascinating conversation lined up with Hobbs Magaret. We're going to be diving deep into the world of regenerative agriculture and ranching, discussing everything from grazing habits to the ecological significance of grazing. We'll also be exploring the impact of social media on the regenerative movement and the complex issues facing American culture and agriculture. So sit back, relax, and let's reboot our thinking about farming, ranching, and food systems. Before we get to that, I want to talk about last week's guest, Justin Harris, and his family's soap. I've been using not only their soap, but also their deodorant and their body boost for about 3 months now. With over 25 different soaps to choose from, you'll always be putting a clean, pure product on your skin made with ingredients you can trust from people we know right here on this podcast. Wild Ass soap feels great on your skin and washes off clean and leaves you smelling great. From then till my next shower, I depend on my Wild Ass aluminum-free beef tallow deodorant. And if you're looking to support a great family and feel clean, smell great, head on over to wildasssoap.com or click the link in the description. And don't forget to use the code REBOOT for 10% off your first order. Hey, you want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money. All in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify, and when you want to take your conversations with fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. Best of all, it's totally free with no catch. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today. So we get lucky with video and audio today.
Yeah, isn't that exciting?
Yeah. How are you, buddy?
Oh, dude, I am just beautifully aware of my own impending death. How are you doing?
Well, interesting you say that. I can't say I'm mentally in the same place. I was kind of having the same thoughts yesterday that we're all dying just at different rates. But yeah, so what's new? What's new down in Lufkin, Texas area?
Oh, everything is being completely recreated 10,000 times a moment, I think. So everything's new all the time. But in terms of ranching, it's hotter than a motherfucker. That's for sure.
Good way to start off the podcast. I can agree with that. The last couple of days we've kissed 100 degrees up here, which, last year it wouldn't have been bad. This year, 100 degrees is miserable because it's actually humid.
Oh no.
Yeah. So it's kind of get up at daybreak and go get your stuff done and get in the house before it gets too hot.
Right. Definitely a great excuse to take a little time to rest and relax.
Well, there's a saying that I like to repeat, and I don't know where it came from, but only mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun.
Well, I guess that makes me an Englishman, doesn't it?
Yeah, we're kind of that flavor, I suppose.
Well, shit, my name is Hobbs. I don't think it gets a whole lot more English than that.
Fair point.
Well, I mean, and my family surnames are Harwell, Montgomery, Green. So I guess that makes me a mad dog.
Fair enough.
Anyway, yeah, man, it's well, I'm glad that you guys look like maybe you've gotten a little bit of rain up there, so that's fantastic.
Oh gosh, June has just been.
I got your phone is it's on the counter. Yeah, my in-laws are in town.
Oh, that's fun.
And they're from Spain, so they do whatever they want.
I'm not going to edit that out. So yeah, June was actually pretty spectacular, to be honest with you.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's been crazy. I think we've gotten 9 or 10 inches of rain in the last.
Dude, I told you the rain was coming.
You know, it's hard to have faith sometimes. It's really hard to have faith when you're at single digits for, almost 10 months for your rainfall totals.
Well, that's why I have to have a community.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So a little over a month ago, I interviewed a guy named Brian Bledsoe. I forget what episode number that was. I had him on a podcast and we recorded on Monday and I released it a week later. And strangely enough, like the day after we recorded, it started raining and it kind of rained for about a month. it's we
That's
it,
awesome.
topped it off with a couple 100-degree days last 2 days that really made the warm season grass pop. I was driving through some big blue yesterday that was probably 36 to 40 inches tall already.
Nice.
Yeah.
How has your land responded compared to others around you?
Well, even some pastures that I thought that I used a little heavy kind of through the dormant season have just they've woken up and popped just like everything else on the ranch. The stuff I used a little bit on the hard side over the winter, it took a few extra days to kind of wake up, but I can't tell a difference now. Um,
What do you mean used a little on the hard side through the winter?
it just took a little bit too much off. I mean, and I know that I say it's hard. You can't really overgraze during the dormant season. Um, but I depend on a lot of rain, not a lot of rain. Like the fall moisture will grow quite a bit of cool season grass up here, just like it does down there. But when you don't get any and it's colder than normal, none of that cool season grows over the winter. So that kind of hurt. Um, we didn't really supplement a whole lot this winter, either mine or the customer cows I had on the place, and they both herds did okay. We didn't really experience any death loss. Everything kind of turned out fine. Cows were looking pretty rough there about the middle of May, because we were running out of groceries. But once it started raining, a couple days later, the grass came in, started growing. Things turned around, started looking real good. I'd say probably, for where we're at going into the 1st of July, I'd like to see more of the client cows slicked off. Um, most of mine are. I'd say most of mine are nice and slicked off and shiny by now. Some of the customer cattle are lagging a little bit behind. I'm not sure why. Trying to figure that out, but they'll get there.
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems to be a bit of a theme this year. A lot of folks are having a little harder time getting their cattle to slick off across the board, maybe, especially the ones who aren't just throwing tons of dewormer and supplement at them.
Yeah, I kind of recall back to 2019. 2019 was a totally different year for rainfall for me and kind of climate, but we had similar forage. It was, we had a lot of moisture. We had some good growing days. And I'd say it was a little cooler and cloudier in 19 than it is now, but similar kind of amounts of rainfall, in this time of growing season. And the grass got really washy. Okay. So, I mean, you've heard that, right? What does
Yeah.
that mean? It means it's just washing through them. It's really liquid. It's going real fast. So how do you fix that? Well, you can either adjust the ration they're eating, jam some more dry matter in them, or if you're doing what we do, move them even faster, which kind of sounds counterintuitive, but that's what seems to work.
Interesting. One of the things that Jaime recommended was that you don't move the cattle until the sun's been out for 4 hours, so that energy level rises. Obviously you're never going to be able to get that fiber amount up to the to match the amount of protein in that real washy forage, but if the energy level is a little bit higher, that Brix is a little bit higher, that might help even some things out. That's what he said he was doing down in Katy, Texas, when he was managing down there, when his owner really pushed him to go hardcore with his total grazing thing, and all they had was a bunch of ball clover, and they were out of hay. So he was moving these cattle onto clover, but he would just wait until the sun been out for 4 hours, and it helped firm up that stool a little bit, which I had never heard, but I thought was very interesting. And that's a good little note for me to keep in the back of in my hip pocket.
Well, while we're here, since you brought it up, let's timing of moves. Are you how often are you moving your cows right now?
4 times.
4 times a day? What times of day are you moving and why?
Uh, right now, since it's so hot outside, I'm just any time in the somewhere between 9 and 10, somewhere between 11 and 12, somewhere between 2 and 3, somewhere between 4 and 5. That's my schedule. I'm not very rigorous because I have a whole lot of other stuff going on in my life. So my routine is not exactly right. But the thing that I'm doing right now is I just want to make sure that they get that really high energy, good stuff in the day, and then go back to the shade a little bit satisfied, and then they spend all night cleaning up the rest of it. So I just want to make sure that they get all of the good stuff that's really high energy throughout the day, and then in the evening they're cleaning it out, and then at that point, once the hot weather clears, then it's really just about keeping them on kind of a semi routine. And once you're moving 4 times a day, the bricks doesn't really matter as much because you're getting the full variability. But if it's not too terribly brutal, I'd rather start them a little bit later than earlier, simply because of the fact that I can catch a little bit more of that high energy level.
Have you noticed any diet changes during the day? Like, do they eat different stuff in the morning versus your, early morning versus mid morning versus, afternoon or evening moves?
I got them so tight that it's really non-selective, and so it just doesn't really even matter. I will say that my butcher animals right now, they're in a pasture with a lot of spiny amaranth, which is a invasive weed, but is also of the amaranth family. And in the pastures where it's growing, it tends to be much more compacted, and they will take all of the grass and clover, and there's some cover crops, some pearl millet in there. They'll obviously hit the pearl millet first, which is not a mystery, but then they'll hit the grass. But then overnight they'll clear off all the seed heads of that spiny amaranth, and so that seems to be that would make sense because it will they get the most bang for their buck on the green stuff during the day, and then that really high protein amaranth, which allegedly, according to some studies, lowers the cholesterol level in cattle.
I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, I was just reading about it this morning, and saw a study that summarized some other studies, and I don't know how similar spiny amaranth is to the cereal amaranth that they were comparing, but hey, it's probably close enough to have some overlap. That'd be my guess.
Yeah, and I'd imagine it's fairly similar to Palmer amaranth, which is what I call pigweed, or what people around here call pigweeds.
It's probably very, very closely related to the spiny amaranth that we have down here.
Yeah,
Probably almost the same thing.
yeah, there was I don't know if you've been following my TikTok lately, but and there's something on there I kind of want to talk about, but
Cool.
the end of that is somebody made a comment like, "Oh, cows won't eat those hogweeds. Cows won't."
Oh, I saw that. I saw
I'm
that.
like, "Oh, really? Okay." So I took a video, 2 cows, like right less than 5 minutes after moving into a new paddock. Moved out of a paddock they've been in for 3 4 days, like 80 cows, 68 acres. Put them in a 16-acre deal, and these two are running by grass to go to this Palmer amaranth and strip the leaves
Interesting.
and the seeds off of it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I got a video of it, posted it. Like, yeah, you're right. Cows won't eat it.
Right. I don't really see the cattle. I don't really see the cattle going for that first, but they sure don't have a problem with it. My cows sure don't have a problem with it. I was interested to see that during a little bit earlier in the year that hemlock, the cattle were very, very favorable on that hemlock as soon as they would go into which allegedly one of the most poisonous plants on the planet. And they're like, oh, thank you very much. And they're smart, they'll stop eating at the areas where it's most highly concentrated with the toxin, which is the base of the stem, and the roots. So they'll leave 4 to 6, maybe 8 inches of the stem left, and then take everything else. And it's like, well, you almost know what you're doing. And knock on wood, I haven't lost any to it this year. I may have lost one last year. She was acting weird, and then mysteriously was dead, showing signs of convulsion last year, but it wasn't very heavy in the hemlock in that area. Maybe cows have aneurysms too. I don't know.
Sometimes they just lose the will to live, I think.
Yeah, sudden unexpected death.
Yeah. Listening to you talk about weed stems and knowing that you move your cattle off and I move my cattle off, and I think the guys that might have problems with weed toxicity, or they're going into a pasture they haven't been for a while and they stay in there too long, and the cattle will go back to some of those weeds that maybe they've eaten the top of and the top wasn't toxic. But if you leave them in there too long, that weed starts to recover and grow, concentrates that toxicity a little bit more to protect itself. Cow comes by and is hungry and is like, oh, that was good last week. I'll take another bite of that today because there's not a whole lot else growing. She takes that bite and starts building up that toxicity. And I think maybe that's where some guys get into problems. There's plants that I've got that, people say, well, cows don't eat, or that's toxic. And I see them eating them. I mean, yeah, is larkspur toxic? Sure. How much of it does a cow have to eat? About 3-4 pounds. Like it's a pretty significant amount. Can a calf get sick and die off larkspur? Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a function of body weight. And it's like toxicity is a function of dose, right?
That's what allegedly.
So toxicity is a function of dose. I mean, water's toxic. And if you drink too much of it, you can drown yourself. You can literally die from drinking too much water. So is water toxic? Is water a toxin? In certain circumstances, yes. And dose determines toxicity. That's the way I always understand how that works.
Well, certainly, you have to respect the intelligence of plants. I mean, you hit them with a sudden graze, and the plants are like, "Oh, unexpected! I wasn't ready for this." And then, whoop, they'll uptake. They'll throw up all of those toxins. Just the same way that the browse will do with tannins. And if you don't move your cows, you're going to get into that response. I mean, you might call it the responsive phase. You don't want your cattle to be on forage by the time the forage has an opportunity to respond, to the grazing. You always want it to be a sneak attack, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and you want the grass to be thinking that, oh man, I haven't had cows in here for 60 days and I've been having all this time to grow. Then all of a sudden a fleet of hooves comes through and mows the pasture down to 2 inches high, and it's gone in 2 days.
That's right. It's nice. That's very nice. I like to think about nature, looking at imagine a tree looking at the seasons. Like if a tree experienced a year in the same way that we experienced a day, just how psychedelic that would look and how fast it would be changing, and then the lifespan of all of the plants and animals moving around. I imagine that a hummingbird experiences the world much more slowly than we do. Have you ever watched a video of a hummingbird in slow motion?
Yeah, they're really cool.
It's like just like a regular, it's just like regular activity. I'm looking this way, I'm looking that way, but it's just really super sped up from our perspective. And who's to say that trees and other forms of life that we probably stupidly don't consider to be conscious don't experience the world in a very similar but differently timed way.
I've wondered about that too. Like, do different things experience the flow of time at different rates? Does that depend on animal size? Does that depend on metabolic rate? Are trees communicating just so slowly because they have such a long lifespan that we can't hear them?
Oh, I'm sure they are. I believe more time I spend on the land, the more I realize that everything is conscious. The Native Americans, the indigenous people were totally right that even a rock has a form of consciousness. Our consciousness is bounded by, our, to some degree, our physical makeup. I certainly can't speak to any more esoteric than that, but just because our consciousness doesn't look like what a rock's consciousness or a plant's consciousness, it's absolutely conscious. And the more time you spend on the land, the more time you will understand that. And that's one of the reasons why I think that the land responds so positively to high density grazing, simply because it's like a kid. When you give them something that you know that they want and they need, they get all excited. The land gets all excited when it gets what it needs. And if you put a herd of graziers of grazing animals over the top of it, the land is like, well, thank you. You know, especially at high densities, because this is what it's been wanting genetically. Now, I discovered in reading yesterday or 2 days ago that dung beetles co-evolved alongside dinosaurs. Did you know that?
I can believe that.
That means that herd effect and grazing is not only older than bison, but also much older than the Pleistocene animals. That's the grazing is older than grass. Grass is 50 million years old. Um, the proto ruminants, the first very primitive ruminant digestive systems, are about 50 million years old, and dung beetles came around about 130 million years ago. So you know what that means? That means that dung beetles, like anything else, expect a good return on their investment. So they're not going to be going around looking for sparse manure piles. They're going to be concentrated in an area with a lot of manure. And that means these dinosaurs, the herbivore dinosaurs, were in herds, chased around by, raptors or whatever, just exactly the same as predators and or carnivores and herbivores were in our recent history or during the Pleistocene. So like herd effect is like 150 million years old, and the ecology has evolved over this 150 million years to expect, and has the ecology, if you consider it to be conscious, it appreciates when you give it its predetermined genetic expectation of herd activity. And we humans, especially the last 100 years, have not done a very good job of delivering that herd activity that the land, to some degree, consciously expects.
You think dung beetles were bigger 150 million years ago?
Probably. I mean, a T-Rex poop is probably pretty large, and a Stegosaurus poop is probably pretty large.
I was I go to herbivores, grazing herbivores. Think these huge brontosauruses that are like 6 or 10 tons or whatever. Like,
Mm-hmm.
can you just imagine the volume of poo?
Oh yeah, it's incredible. And they didn't have grass yet. It was all basically fern based, which is pretty incredible. And yeah, I mean, dung beetles reveal a lot about the history of the past. Another thing I was talking about yesterday on TikTok or Instagram or something is like, you know, you watch Aladdin, the Disney movie, and it's all desert and terrible. And then what's the symbol of the thing that opens the cave or whatever? It's the scarab. It's the dung beetle, and it's like dung beetle, desert, doesn't make sense. The only way that the Egyptians would hold the dung beetle in such high esteem is if that it wasn't desert. So there's no way that ancient Egypt was a desert. I mean, this is I haven't looked into this, and there's probably lots of great paleontological or archaeological data on it, but it's in order for a culture to appreciate what the dung beetle does to the point where they deify it, they would have to be going, oh, herds, dung beetles, predators. This is amazing. So, there's probably some like ancient Egyptian Alan Savory out there being like, herd effect is very important.
Oh, funny you should mention him and the Sahara Desert in the same sentence, because I believe he has said that the Sahara Desert, maybe not in whole, but in part, used to be green and likely turned to desert because of overgrazing or overfarming and improper land management use. And I think I can understand that. And you know what I was sitting here listening to you talk, and man, you open up so many, like, you showed me so many rabbit holes to trace. Like, we could go run down Younger Dryas. We could talk about dinosaur herd effect. Like that's kind of fascinating. I've never really thought about it. And the thinking that I've done in the last several years in the context of dinosaurs and how it relates to what you and I do is, I realized, or maybe not realized, but I feel that the source of oil, it's not dead dinosaurs decomposing. It's dinosaur poop that was likely cycled into the soil by dung beetles, that built thousands of feet of carbon rich topsoil
Oh, that's super interesting.
that was then covered up by volcanic eruptions or meteorite debris. And then those layers were compressed over millions of years, and that carbon rich soil synthesized into hydrocarbons.
Oh, that's super interesting, man. I find that to be, and the sorry, let me think about that for a second because it's so awesome.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, think about this. Like you've got a mind that can grasp large numbers and large systems. The volume of oil that has been extracted compared to the living biomass of all dinosaurs. Like what's
130 trillion barrels.
okay,
I'm
what
sorry.
I don't even know that number. That's a fantastic volume of oil to come from living biomass that decayed.
That's what I'm
I have a
saying.
hard.
That's going through my mind right now. It's mind blowing because it speaks to how much we can actually put into the soil. One of the things Elon Musk is saying right now is like, well, we don't need to look towards farming because we're only the problem is the stuff that's buried deep underground, and now we've released it into the soil, and so that's extra systemic. Like it's taken, we brought in new stuff from the system. It's like, no, actually, like I don't think there's any cap on what we can put into the soil. Like it's probably far more than we can consider. What I want to see, if like that, if that's true, let's just follow that. Let's think that thesis through. If that's true and we find that that's the most effective way to build soil, which has implications for civilization far beyond just climate change. Like if we had 14 feet, like they did in Illinois when the pioneers arrived, we could do 14, 20 feet of topsoil. That means that we can live in an ecology that's so good that we don't have to suffer, really. Like it's my opinion that agriculture was only invented simply because the Younger Dryas wiped out all of the herd animals and wiped out human beings and killed the ecology, so we had to scrape and figure out a way to survive. And so if we get our minds oriented towards this notion that the entire ecology is built on grazing, and that needs to be our number one most important technology to create a great, wonderful ecology, then the next thing is, okay, well, we got to throw billions and billions of dollars at getting mammoths and mastodons back. And then we got to figure out how to graze them with drones or something so that we have a way of controlling them. Because our brains at this point are too big just to coexist as another animal. And that then we go to the point of having some uh some amazing technological Manhattan Project space race for grazing, and maybe that's what we're at the very beginning of right now. So I mean, that is such a cool idea that it's actually just topsoil made by dinosaur herds at high densities with dung beetles the size of a dachshund, like
Dung beetles the size of a beetle.
yeah, exactly, yeah, like a
Volkswagen beetle.
Volkswagen beetle. Now that's a cool idea. That's a cool idea. I like that a lot. So yeah, man, it's crazy. I mean, I see this everywhere. This, like, to me, the world is such a grazing ecology, and when I woke up to this idea, you can't see it. You can't go around anywhere without seeing it. And I've been talking about this for a while. And I know other people have talked about it, but it just blows my mind. It's like we're a fish in water who suddenly becomes aware that they're surrounded by water. It's like you turn on the TV and there's somebody playing football, and you don't question that it's a flat, it's artificial turf now, but it's like it's a grazed field, like that's a savanna environment. That's a herd effect created environment, and we're out there playing games on it. You can imagine a bunch of, like, this is a commercial that somebody should do, probably like the South African rugby team, right? Since the Springbok antelope is their mascot,
Okay.
they should have like a bunch of like primitive man, you know, all scraggly with a loincloth and long beards and hair. They have this like primitive rugby ball, right? And they're walking through the trees, and they come out of the trees into this clearing, and it's this field, right? But the grass is all super tall, and there's like a lion going through the grass, and they're like snakes and stuff. and they're like look at each other like, how are we supposed to play this game? And then suddenly like this massive herd of animals comes through and just grazes the entire field down, and then suddenly we have this wonderfully grazed field, and then everybody's out there playing rugby or whatever. So like games and culture can like, what game, like I've thought about this also, there's only one game that we play, which is probably the most primitive game that can be played in tall grass. You know what that is? Hide and seek. Like, tell me that's like not some primitive try not to die training right there. Like, that's what that is. Clearly, and all the more evolved games than that are played on a freshly grazed surface. Like, this is so deep to the human condition that we don't even recognize it anymore. Like, golf courses, parks, rich people's estates, the median in the highway, like everything is like, we're like, oh, it's fire prevention. Like, well, yeah, but the only reason that we have to prevent the fire is because it's supposed to be grazed. Like, it's just everywhere you see a lawnmower, that should be a grazing animal. Like, it's just our planet is, I think, the most important part of the engine that makes our planet go. Is the grazing, is the herd. It's just this big ball of energy moving around, just pushing the whole thing forward. It's like Sisyphus pushing the ball up the hill, and then it rolls back down where the grass regrows. And then they push it back up the hill and it rolls back down, the grass regrows. And they're just happy as pie doing it too. So I mean, it's this planet is a grazing ecology, and it's remarkable how pervasive it is.
There's, gosh, every time you get to going, there's like, you keep throwing these cans of worms at me. They go right by. I can't even catch them. Uh, it, Going back to cloning mammoths.
All right.
It's, oh, I'm not sure I can get behind that. I understand. I understand what you're saying. I totally understand what you're saying. I've watched Jurassic Park too many times.
Yeah.
And
Well, they didn't have very good drone technology in Jurassic Park. But if they'd had good enough drone technology, they just would have hit those animals with a trank off of a drone and been done with it.
I suppose that's fair. But the more to the point is, once we let that genie out of the bottle, it's out. And there will be misuses of that technology. Okay. Putting that aside, we know the importance of a gut microbiome and the biology, the digestive biology, the microbes that live in the digestive tract of not just cattle, but every ruminant animal. I mean, even people, right? A significant part of our body function and who we are and our role in the ecosystem is determined by our gut microbiome. When we're bringing a cloned animal back from zero, there's not that genetic repository of of the gut microbiome, right? We're not bringing that back. We're just bringing the animal back that houses that gut microbiome and those microbes. And maybe if we're going to bring an animal back that's been extinct for 10,000 years, maybe that animal just can't live anymore because its biology isn't compatible with the biology that exists on the planet now. Maybe they would lack critical microbial colonies to be able to adequately use what's available now. Like, and that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like, okay, yeah, we can clone these animals. We can bring them back to life. We have the technology. We can rebuild him. Awesome. What do they eat? And how many do we have to bring back before we have a suitable genetic reservoir to be able to continue that species without, horrible problems with interbreeding?
120.
I mean, yeah, and that's going to be a really expensive endeavor. But aren't they doing it right now in Russia?
I think they're trying. They've been trying for a while to do that. And I would say, on one hand, I think there are so many types of microorganisms that still exist that I think we would probably be able to. I think something would come in and fill that niche. So there are so many discovered and undiscovered, and also it's possible that I wonder if we can analyze what is in their. I wonder if we can analyze any dung or preserved dung to see if there are any bacteria remains in there. I obviously don't know enough about the science to see if we could do that. But if we could clone a mammoth, it seems like we could clone some sort of bacteria. Although that actually does sound like a terrible idea. But to some degree, I think it's still worth discussing simply because the uh, elephants exist. Elephants obviously are hindgut fermenters. And I believe the mastodon and mammoth, I think one of them is a ruminant, one of them is a hindgut fermenter. I can't remember which one is which, but I would be willing to guess that there's enough of a variety of microorganisms that we could fill those digestive niches. That would be my guess. It'd be worth trying, but it would be and it would also be very educational if it didn't work. So this is all totally hypothetical, but at the same time, it's if I had my way about it, what I would get to do before I would die would be manage the grazing of a Pleistocene style herd, and then hopefully my children would be able to manage grazing in a dome on Mars for terraforming purposes. That's the logical extension of herd effect, because if herd effect is so important to terraforming that it created all of the oil and the topsoil, then you got to create a machine that can give birth to herd animals and feed them autonomously in a dome and create some sort of proto environment so that they could terraform it. I mean, that would be the fastest way, maybe not the fastest, but it'd be an interesting idea to explore, because I don't even really view what we're doing as food production or even grazing or land management. It's terraforming. We're terraforming. Like, we live in such a broken ecology that at this point we might as well consider it terraforming, and we should be throwing Elon Musk, NASA, Department of Defense level dollars at using herd animals to terraform. But we don't know that we don't know that it's the most important thing, if we care about staying alive and having a healthy planet. So we don't throw a ton of money at it like we should.
No. They don't throw a ton of money at it because it's not big business. It's
Well,
not
not
big
yet.
business.
Yeah, certainly.
They haven't figured out how to structure a business that can extract the maximum federal dollars from the subsidy stream that they can invest in. That's why they haven't done it.
Well, it's fundamentally not an extractive business, right? That's one of the fundamental problems with agriculture or regenerative agriculture versus conventional agriculture. Because conventional agriculture is a fundamentally extractive business. You're mining the soil in some degree or another. Regenerative, to use that word that doesn't mean anything anymore, is just seriously. We can talk about that here in a second, but it's like somebody in Australia the other day used the word hand wavy to describe regenerative, and I thought that was great, because it's like, we're regenerative. Well, what does that mean? Well, we follow natural cycles. Well, what does that mean? We move our cows a lot. Well, what does that mean? Okay, like that's nice. So I think we've jumped the shark on regenerative, but regenerative agriculture is a fundamentally non-extractive. It's a symbiotically extractive endeavor, and so the profit margin, like, we as organisms, we find a surplus, we exploit it, and then we move on to another surplus. I mean, this is the first time that our modern civilization has said, and I say modern civilization because various indigenous people have had a much better understanding of this for a long time, but this is the first time our modern consciousness has gone, you know what, maybe we should stop just extracting, because eventually we're going to run out of stuff to extract. And that fundamentally doesn't really work in the business model that is predominant on the planet, because capitalism is built on the extraction, exploitation of natural resources. And I don't mean to seem like a communist, because I think there is a great degree of envy and lower angels that are that are associated with communism and neo-Marxism, and striving to accomplish things and striving to achieve and having ambition is a great thing, but also recognizing that we have to live symbiotically with the planet is it's important also to recognize that in that modern capitalism exists in antagonism to the symbiosis of existing on this planet.
Okay. Got some thoughts there for you.
Can't wait.
Capitalism is built on an exploitive extractive structure. And so I had a good conversation with Coulter DeVries on the Ranch Investor podcast. I think it comes out like next week. So go listen to that. Their whole thing is about like trying to democratize land ownership, and it goes deeper than that. And I know you and I have talked before about that there's changes coming in the land ownership pattern. Like, the average age of people involved in quote farming keeps going up. Well, most of those people that are really old involved in quote farming are just absentee landowners that are just getting really old, and that land's getting ready to turn over. Yeah, there's a lot of operators that are kind of old too that are getting ready to turn over. And we're facing a lot of turnover in the next few years in land ownership. And hopefully that'll come with land use patterns. And to a large degree, I think some of the extractive, exploitive practices in agriculture are going to continue. Like, we're not going to see the end of feedlots. We're not going to see the end of corn, soybean, and cotton farming and monocrop agriculture with bare soil for 9 months out of the year. Maybe you and I will live long enough to see the end of that. I hope so. But what I'm getting at is, there's something else we've talked about before on a podcast. It's about, being in a position where you're owner, manager, and labor on your operation, which you and I both are, right? If we want to do something dumb or we want to try to graze a different way, okay, that's a management decision. Management doesn't have to convince ownership that it's a good idea. And management doesn't have to convince labor that it's a good idea and that this is how it needs to be done. We just go do it, right? But when you're facing a situation like probably the majority of folks in agriculture are, where they're trying to make a living on leased land with an absentee landowner that's far divorced from the management consequences and just wants their check every year because they're depending on that rental income, whether it's a cash rent or a share crop basis, they're probably depending on that income in some way, shape, or form. And if you tell them, hey, I'm going to change the way I farm, it's going to hurt yields for a couple of years. So instead of 2,000, you're going to get $1,500, but it'll be better later. And it's going to cut my costs. Probably going to say, no, you need to keep paying that because we need that money. I don't know for sure, but I'm sure that that's what drives a lot of it. Or just management can't articulate to the absentee ownership the value of more regenerative practices or of less soil destroying practices. Really, it can be hard to get absentee landowners to see the value in that, especially if they think it's going to cost them income. So the other big thing is inflation, cost of doing business, and the value of production of the land. Your land can only support so many cattle. If fuel goes to $8, if labor goes to $50 an hour, milk goes to 10, bread goes to 10, your land doesn't get to support more cattle, does it? Right?
Well, I mean, obviously.
Okay. So the problem we're running into is I don't think there's anywhere you can go anymore in the country and buy land and pay for it with cattle. Like, there might be some very isolated examples. I think it's even problematic to go anywhere west of 35 and try to do any kind of farming or ranching without multi-species grazing.
I'll tell you where it works. Actually, we've done the models on this. There are a couple of things that I want to talk about this. Here, I'll let the cat out of the bag. Like the what's happening right now is that, as you have probably seen, probably behind the scenes, is that institutional money is being thrown at people who have a name out there in the regenerative world. And so anybody who has the capacity to graze well, if you position yourself properly, you can start a ranch investment fund, and you can have institutional money throwing themselves at you, you know. And so that's how, it's so many of the so many of the grazing gurus out there, like, we just want to be liked by everybody, and we want people to think we're smart, and we want to help other people change the way that they graze, and so we'd be influential. Like, fuck that. No, that's not going to work. The best way to do it is to accumulate as much institutional money as you can, buy as many ranches as you can, create systems to scale what you do, and then do it. It's not going to work west of, as you said, 35. It's not going to work west of the 100th meridian. That's all rich people who want to have views of the Rocky Mountains or whatever. That's fine. Let them do that. That era of ranching is dead, as far as I'm concerned. The ranching in the American West is a dying thing. It needs to be done, but as a lucrative business opportunity, like, that's out, because that area has been mined and no longer supports the labor unit metrics, and especially the stocking rate to be
Colorado River and the Ogallala Aquifer cannot support it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And all of those ranches out there are completely dependent upon diesel, which is, as you know, are in most ranches are. But here in the southeast, and anywhere basically to the east of 35, you can get into that one animal per acre, one animal every 2 acres, if you're using the properly framed and properly genetically adapted animals. So to me, all of the opportunity is in the Sun Belt. I think that's where all of the ranch investment opportunities, and there's also so much timber there that shouldn't be timber. Like, it should be savannas. So one of the things that we're looking at, and we, as a group of people that I've been working at, is like, why don't we just buy a bunch of timberland, cut out the ideal savanna that we want, sell off that timber, and then you have the great ranches of the 21st century. Like, to me, the great ranches of the 21st century are waiting to be cut out of the pine belt that is supposed to be pine savanna. And that's where you can get that 1 to 2 acres per cow. That's where you can get those really high stocking rates. That's where you can graze year round. And if you really efficiently use protein supplement, you don't need to use much hay at all. You get 40 plus inches of rain per year. You get, even when it's dry, like here, low of 77, high of 100 for the last week. There's still dew on the grass in the morning because there's just so much moisture. So that's where the opportunity is in terms of investing in ranching and investing in money. Investing in ranching, investing in land. So to me, the popularization of Yellowstone is the indication that ranching in the American West has reached its zenith and is now on the denouement. And I think that what's going to happen very, very soon is that as ranching shifts from a protein supply endeavor to an eco-management endeavor that happens to produce protein as a waste product, people are going to be looking at things from a very, very different zeitgeist. And I think that's going to open up a lot of possibilities. And especially as people begin to learn that and begin to understand that savanna is a much more, especially if we can prove out your dinosaur poop soil dung beetle theory, that savanna is a far more productive ecological system than closed-in forests. Then the American Southeast suddenly becomes the richest possible place to create healthy, functioning ecologies.
Yep. I take the Stockman grass farmer, and I have for years. I mean, way back even before Allen Nation left us. And somebody else that's not with us anymore, I think it was Gordon Hazard, said this, that the land east of the Mississippi is so productive that if used holistically and correctly to graze livestock, we wouldn't need to have a single bovine west of the Mississippi River.
We wouldn't need it, but we would want it to make
True.
sure we're managing. Yeah, to point taken though, you know, it's like any of that land is just profoundly productive, but if used properly, but is so uh, missing in nutrients right now because it's all been sucked up by pine trees. You know.
So the problem with having absentee ownership or distributed ownership group, and I hate to keep going back to this,
No, that's great.
is there has to be some kind of shared stewardship vision or shared ecological vision that's totally bought into by the owner partners, or at least, the 80% majority of them. Without clear ecological goals, then things just become about profit. And I'm starting to think more and more that I'm not a capitalist. I'm not a socialist, of course, but I'm not a capitalist because there has to be a limit. There has to be limits placed on extractive processes. We're not going to stop pumping oil, just like we're not going to stop CAFOs overnight. We're not going to stop pumping oil, even with all the electrification they want to do. Our system is built on certain things. And, okay, we want to electrify the power grid. We want to put all electric cars on the road. Great. We're still a long way from electric mining machines and electric construction equipment. We're a long way from that. We're a long way from having, effective electric transport links. We're a long way from, being able to process all that stuff. And we're really far away from having it all found that we need, like the raw materials.
Right. Yeah, and it's definitely going to take some big technological breakthroughs, especially in battery storage, to get there. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely there are challenges, but the opportunities are certainly ahead of us as well. Going back to the distributed ownership thing, I think this is why it's so important to, and this is why I mentioned in the beginning that anybody who has a name in the regenerative world, who has been so moved to go out on social media and create a brand for themselves, whether deliberately or just as a result of the effort that they've been doing, has to be the center of a sort of distributed ownership model, because they are the people who can create or to articulate an animating principle from which this business can spring, and that is very, very important. That's one of the things that we can actually learn very beautifully from the capitalists, the Henry Fords of the world. It's like, if you can articulate a vision that people can get behind, then you have the capacity to really grow and scale what you do. So I mean, that's really the goal, and so I think that's one of the things probably that the holistic management system does very well, is creates a set of goals, and that you can always sort of cross check what you're doing through, and that's certainly nice. Obviously, it does have the capacity at times to break down into, holistic decision making can break down into holistic indecision making. That's a Johann Zeitzman criticism, and but obviously every system of analysis is going to constantly require rework. That's why Zeitzman loves his idea constantly just goes back to maximize sustainable profit per acre. And if you want to put a more ecological spin on that, it becomes maximize sustainable carbon sequestration per acre. Because if you're doing that, that means that you're grazing better, you're growing more animals, you're growing more forage, and carbon becomes the one metric that everything stems from. And so if you're maximizing the carbon sequestration per acre in a savanna environment, then that means you're profiting more. That means you're growing more forage. On a sustainable level, obviously, we all know that we can just level our property and make a little bit more money this year. But on a sustainable level, that's a different analysis. So it's really important, I think, for the people who, if you have some charisma, if you have the ability, like yourself, to go forth and, you know, put yourself out on social media, get a bit of a following, make a podcast, make a name for yourself, and be the person who can answer all the questions about how things ought to operate and give a detailed and well thought out response to the vision and to questions about the vision, then those are the kind of people who investment bankers should get behind, and in venture capitalists, institutional people. Um, Pretty soon, what's going to happen, in my view, is that institutional, and it's already happening right now, institutional money is running out of people to throw money at. And so anybody who pops their head up and goes, "Ooh, I do regenerative ranching," institutional money is like, "Here, have some money," and even if they're not any good at it. And we've reached the point of saturation, which, by the way, you and I have watched. The like TikTok
I'm
and the
waiting on them to throw money at me. And if anybody's out there listening, any institutional money that just wants to float my way, my email is redhillsrancher@gmail.com. Email me and we'll talk. We'll make
well,
something happen.
what is your what would your vision be for that?
Um, oh,
Like
I
if
mean,
someone gave you $20 million tomorrow and you had to come up with a plan for it, what would you do?
20 million.
Yeah, okay, it's $20 million
Like
dollars,
we
but
can knock a zero off. Like that's a little more realistic number. Like 20 million, I'd go buy another ranch. But two, I mean, there'd be a lot of stuff here that I'd fix. I mean, I've got some deferred maintenance stacked up. There's some projects that I want to do. Um, First would be to develop my west side, the water systems, the fence, everything I want to do. That's probably only about quarter mil to 300,000 all in. Um, I want to tear out about 3.5 miles of woven wire fence that's over 100 years old and replace it with a more wildlife friendly 5 wire barbed wire fence. Um,
Okay, right. But okay,
I
let's
mean,
think about this a little bit from a little bit bigger, right? So imagine if you had, say, $20 million, you could buy three more ranches in various parts. You could create
right.
a system of operating procedures. And then as that land appreciates, you can use that money to reinvest in the properties. And then all of those properties are slowly getting better. And if you raise enough money, then you can do those infrastructure projects right up front. And the thing that people are going to love about these investment opportunities is it's not a tech company. You're not going to throw away $20 million on a blood test that doesn't work. It's you still have an asset to backstop if you flame out. And so it's a huge opportunity right now. And so yeah, if anybody, I think that if there's anybody out there who is really in venture capital land looking to spend $20 million, yeah, go talk to Red Hills Rancher. I'm sure he can come up with a good plan for you. Um, so I mean,
Well,
anybody,
I hate to interrupt you because I know you're
no,
on a roll,
please.
but that plays into carbon. And you and I, we both of us have said this and we agree on it completely that grass fed beef will be a byproduct of the carbon sequestration industry. And that's what we're really talking about here. I
Yeah,
mean,
absolutely. And I think about it as a waste product, just to get my head completely in the ecological zone. But byproduct, waste product, same thing.
right. And, we've talked about dung beetles and it'd be really cool to go back to, I don't know, 6 or 8 thousand years ago, probably long enough after Younger Dryas that civilizations kind of had a chance to reestablish and biology kind of got stable and climate kind of got stable. I think 6 to 8 thousand years ago, Egypt and the Sahara Desert looked completely different.
Yeah, totally.
And I'd really I'd really want to understand why they held the scarab, the dung beetle, in such high reverence and what their and how they got there, what their dogma was to get there, right? And I've been sitting here kind of rolling that around in the back of my head. And if we postulate that carbon is the most important thing on the planet, it's the most important element to keep cycling, to keep moving in the environment. Scarab, dung beetle, kind of the same thing. They take biomass that's no longer alive and they transport it, they upcycle it and they transport it to the subsurface underneath the soil. How much carbon's in that poop ball? Probably a little bit. How much carbon's in a million poop balls? A lot. So it's not just the actions of the one, it's the actions of the many that, that really drive the thing. So did the Egyptians just see it as something that was really awesome that could recycle anything, or did they understand that it was a critical link in the biology of the world to recycle nutrients back into the soil? That's what I'd really like to understand.
Well, it's conventionally translated or understood to be as meaning rebirth, or so that would or being a symbol of rebirth. And so I would that would lead me to believe that they had a more abstract understanding of the value of it, because you can imagine that 6 to 8 thousand years ago they've started agriculture. They know the value of mixing poop with soil and growing stuff out of it, and then they look out at these herds moving around and they're like, oh, those are dung beetles that are doing it just because. Like, that's so clearly there's something very reverent about that, and without the dung beetles, it just doesn't work. It just sits on the land, obviously, and doesn't get recycled, doesn't get put in the ground, doesn't aerate the ground. What a tremendous service they're doing with aeration, getting rid of fly larvae, water infiltration, getting rid of that poop, fertilization, just an incredible. And they probably recognize that the dung beetle is doing all of these things at once. It's a profoundly elegant mechanism in the ecology. Ruminant digestion, with the hoof impact, as well as the fertilization, as well as the saliva, as well as the urine. Very, very elegant mechanism from one source. Dung beetle, very elegant mechanism from one source. And I would be willing to believe that they understood far more, whether it is a result of their renewed understanding after the horror of the Younger Dryas, or as a relic of the probably advanced global civilization that existed before the Younger Dryas, which probably had an even more evolved understanding of the course of biology. Like, imagine a global advanced society that got to watch the majesty of herds with mammoths and mastodons and the American lion, all kinds of terrifying shit. Just this, like, the herd would be such a force of nature that we can't even conceive of today. I think that they probably watched that in awe, in as a in a pre Younger Dryas situation, and to some degree maybe that held over into a post Younger Dryas, and then maybe they also rediscovered it. I'm not sure, but I certainly am appreciating dung beetles more and more every day. And if there was a dung beetle that was, I would be fascinated for somebody to dig an old dung beetle out of the rocks that it's this big. Imagine the holes that they could dig, and the water infiltration and the soil, and the amount of carbon put down there. Oh man, you blew my mind with that, dude. I love that so much. But dinosaur herd effect, man, it's like it's not even. I thought I was so smart when I realized and was thinking so much more about the Pleistocene and these big herd animals. But then when I saw the dung beetle co-evolved alongside the dinosaurs, I was just like, well, those are animals that dwarf the mastodons and mammoths. Like that, it's like a herd of brontosaurus. Like we're just mice running around here playing pretend with these tiny ass little cattle. Like we're influencing the planet. It's just remarkable. It's like, this is the best we got, but so this is why we got to do it as effectively as possible. Wow.
Yeah. I talked to my friend Russ Conzer about my theory about that it was dinosaur poop and carbon rich soil that got compressed to make oil reserves. And this guy worked for Shell for like 30 years. And he pretty much said, yeah, that's right. But we never explain it that way because nobody understands it. People just can't grasp it.
Interesting.
Okay, I get that. So that's why they just say it's dead dinosaurs. But I've never, that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I mean, so we've talked about younger dryas, which, a lot of people's gateway drug to the younger dryas is the Alaska boneyard.
Oh, interesting.
You know what I'm talking about there?
I've heard Russell Carlson mention it. My gateway was Graham Hancock and Russell Carlson uh, on Joe Rogan, but
Okay.
also to some degree, Savannah by Nate Chisholm was also an interesting. Although he is dead wrong on what killed off all of the large ruminants.
Next time I talk to him, I'll have to tell him you said that.
Yeah, he's wrong about it. I mean, maybe he's changed his mind, but like if there were 4 million people and 4 million mammoths on estimated to be in North America at the same time, then they'd just have to be going around, just killing all the mammoths for no reason. And also, why are all of the megafauna still existent extant in places that don't have the microspherules and the nanodiamonds from the overlay pattern of the impacts from the younger dryas exactly mirrors where megafauna it no longer exists. So, and Jaime's going around teaching that now too, that humans killed off all of the megafauna. I'm like, I told him that in Arkansas. I was like, dude, no. And he's like, I have studied it. Okay, Jaime.
So the Alaska boneyard, it's a place up by Fairbanks, Alaska, and it was another Joe Rogan episode. I think the guy's name is John Reeves. If you
Okay.
just search Joe Rogan Alaska boneyard, I guarantee it'll come up. It's right at 3 hours, and it's one of the best ones. Like it's spectacular. Um, so the moral of the story is they do a lot of what's called hydraulic mining. They use like a big 8-inch water monitor to blast away permafrost and see what's there. They found a spot. It's like 15 minutes outside of Fairbanks. There's been mining all around it, but they found a spot and they started pulling fossils out of it. And they've pulled tens of thousands of fossils out of a 4.5-acre site.
Wow.
So here's my theory of how they all concentrated there. That this was a younger Dryas extinction event, and then as the debris fell from the sky and heated up all the glaciers and the snow and the ice and started fires, it pushed these animals down, into these valleys, and then a huge flood came with mud and packed them all up into like a little corner on the of a bend or something, and that's where they all are. So, I mean, that's consistent with what Graham Hancock says. With there was a large heat event, melted a lot of polar ice, global fires, killed off all the vegetation. And like, how do tens of thousands of different animals all end up in one spot? Well, they didn't all just magically go there. I mean, now, yeah, you can put a corn feeder out and get all kinds of crap to come to it. But 12,000 years ago, we didn't have corn feeders. Like we didn't have a salt lick. So why are they all concentrated there? Well, they all had to have been washed there, pushed there somehow.
Flash melt.
Flash melt.
Yeah,
And that
definitely.
many, and to collect like that many animals, I think like, tens of thousands of these giant bison and American lions and, woolly mammoths and all these, huge animals that are extinct now. They all ended up in one little spot. I think there's a lot. I think that younger Dryas impact event, that time frame about 12,000 years ago, I think we're going to start learning a lot more about it as people get interested and start digging into it and challenge the mainstream science.
And as the old archaeologists die off.
Right. The old tenured archaeologists that won't let anybody argue with them because their entire career is built on something that's wrong.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, certainly. And one thing that I've been thinking about recently, if you look at the fossils of bison, like what we have today are very small bison compared to what existed previously. And that's because the forage sucked. And we know that small framed animals do better on low quality forage. So the younger Dryas comes around, it toasts it puts basically a nuclear winter on the whole planet for 1,000 years. What does that mean? It means the forage is going to suck for 1,000 years. And what does that mean? The smaller bison are the ones that are going to survive on they're going to be in better body condition on shittier forage. So it's going to self-select over 1,000 years for smaller bison. So that's my theory on why bison are so small today, is because they can, the small frame could as the only frame that could support those smaller animals.
That tracks. Corrientes weigh 600 to 800 pounds, and they've got what, 400 years of natural selection and adaptation in North America and the desert Southwest to hot climates with poor forage. That definitely tracks.
Yeah. So it's a potentially we're entering into a golden age of archaeological understanding that is going to shift our understanding of the ecology. And what we're experiencing right now in our culture, planet wide, is the hangover of the height, probably 60s and 70s, 80s, maybe 90s, is the height of exploitative, extractive, materialist consumption that we could characterize as human parasitical behavior. And right now we are, I mean, that's not all that we are, but I think that was more expressed through the last 100 years, especially as we figured out how to turn fossil fuel into energy. I think that was far more expressed, and now we're in the hangover of that stage, and we're shifting into a far more symbiotic existence planet-wide. And I think that's why we're seeing so much insanity happening in our world right now, from the individual level up to the geopolitical level, is because we're all in this weird hangover of materialism, and we don't know what to do. And during this giant 100-year-long party, we lost who we were, and we lost our values. And as you know, that's what Nietzsche said, God is dead. Obviously he was, any of us who listen to Jordan Peterson know that he was saying that that just means that we're losing. Sorry, the guy, somebody's mowing outside. Hopefully you can't hear too much. We're just losing our value systems that helped us make sense of the world around us. And now we're like lost children in Times Square. Like, all right, hang on one second. He is literally weed eating right outside my window. Can you hear that?
No, you're good, man.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. So yeah, I mean, cool. Awesome. I'm very grateful that he's out there weed eating. Just hard to concentrate. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think that we're entering this period where, and especially since our leaders are 70 and 80 years old, they're still stuck in this weird extractive, exploitative mindset of like, we have to win the great game and the great Eurasian war if we're going to, be able to survive in the next 100 years. And the rest of us are like, how about I just do a homestead? It's like,
yeah, can I just maybe have some chickens and sell some eggs to my neighbors without the government getting involved?
Right. And to some degree, those of us who have a little bit of a reach, it then becomes our responsibility to reach out and grab a hold of these old levers of power that are existing, that you might call venture capital or institutional funds or things like that, to go ahead and, while the getting is good, to grab onto all of these assets that we possibly can, so we can put our fingerprint on it. And then, while knowing that we're going to lose them over time, set them on track to then be self-sufficient, or more regionally based, or more managed, more in line with a more symbiotic existence. And I know that makes me sound like a hippie, but that's not really what I mean. What I wonder, it's like call it a harakiri capitalist or something like that. I just want to do as best I can and then turn it back over to the next generation. Right now we're definitely in a time where we are in the grips of the last generation, holding on with a death grip as long as they possibly can. Like the millennial generation is like, we have just, in terms of the share of wealth that the millennial generation is holding on to at this stage, compared to, say, the boomers at this stage in their life, is like a 10, 15 or 20% of what they held. So it makes perfect sense that the millennials are looking for an out, and
they want to exit the system, get off the
right. They want to exit the system,
get out of the rat race. And I think that there's a lot of millennials, and even, what's the one after them, Gen Z, Zoomers, the millennials and the Zoomers see the truth of the system for what it is. Like legacy media platforms that you and I and the boomers are still susceptible to, they don't care about them. They're not listening to them. Like CNN, Fox News, ABC, CBS, NBC, nobody listens to them anymore. Nobody watches them. More
Right.
people get their news from Joe Rogan than all the major networks combined. Like I think Tucker Carlson's show on YouTube had like an average of 2 million views a night. That's like 8 times more than he was getting on Fox News.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And these legacy media outlets are only still relevant because of legacy subscribers. People like accounts at airports, like at bars, people that have CNN or headline news as part of a Dish or Direct TV package. That's where most of their subscribers are. Like
Yeah, they know it's going away.
print magazines. Have you noticed print magazines have all but disappeared? And the ones that are left are shrinking.
No, I mean I haven't paid attention to that. The only print magazines that I see are in the poison section of the poison section of the grocery store, which is what I call the section that's right before checkout. You get to the checkout and they have print magazines and candy. And I always tell my kids, you know how they get rat poison? You know how they get rats to eat rat poison? They make it taste good, right? So that's the poison section. And to some degree, it's interesting because that means, and I agree with the fact that I would venture to say that print media and legacy media is poison to the mind the same way that our processed foods are poison to the body. We have processed information and we have processed foods. What we need is unprocessed information and allow ourselves to process it. And we need unprocessed foods and allow ourselves to process it so that we can have a more organic relationship with the fabric of reality.
I like that. I like that processed information analogy. That's really good.
Oh, cool. Yeah, right on, man. But I think that there's also an interesting thing that, the Gen Xers and the older millennials, I guess they're calling themselves elder millennials, in order to feel more important, which I'm one of those. We are still in that in-between phase, that last generation that grew up before the internet. I had probably my first computer with internet access when I was 12. So most of my psychological formation happened
So
prior.
we're going to be that there's a weird half generation
Right.
that grew up with computers. Like we got computers like Apple IIs. Like our first experience to Apple IIs were in like grade school to middle school. And then by the time we got out of high school, there were Pentiums and internet. Like we started school, computers weren't even a thing, calculators were barely a thing, and we end up graduating with the internet. Like
Right.
there's just about like 4 to 6 years of us in there. Because before that, the people that are just like, see, it's 2023. If you are 47 to 48 years old, you missed it. If you are 40, 38 or younger, you grew up, you've always had computers and you've always had internet. It's just that like those of us in the 38 to 48, we didn't get it. Like we had to grow up with it and we saw it.
I'm almost 37, but I grew up in the panhandle of Texas. So everything arrives there 2 years later anyway.
Right.
So
Right.
I'll put myself in that category. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I think if you take that metaphor a little bit farther, then we find ourselves in that weird little half generation being necessarily the bridge culturally between the people who are older and the people who are younger. And that goes back. I mean, obviously, I'll take it back to the topic that I was discussing earlier, being the half generation that has to utilize those older levers of financial power and influence, and then aggregate those assets and then distribute them in a way that is more in line with the consciousness of the younger generation. So, for instance, like if I'm able to put together 3 or 4 ranches with $20 million, what am I going to do? I'm not going to go put an ad on Ranch World ads and hire somebody who's been, doctoring calves since they were 15. I'm going to find somebody who's email or sending me direct messages on TikTok being like, I don't really know anything about ranching, but I find what you're doing fascinating and I want that to be my life. Like that's like those are the people that I'm going to farm out into other little areas like that. Obviously, having some stock sense is important, and it's going to be, and if the horseback element was necessary to what we were doing, which it's not, I don't think, in the American Southeast because of the densities you can achieve.
Yep.
That would be a different story. You kind of have to grow up in that culture to have a really attuned horse sense. It's like the Mongolian horse people or anything like that. The American cowboy is one of the great horse cultures of history. You know,
Well, be careful with that because I think there's a lot of people that would self-identify as cowboy that don't have very good horse sense.
right? You and I know what we're talking about, though.
Yeah, yeah.
Those kids who are handy in a Brandon pin at 9 years old, kind of thing. You know, that kind of deal. Like that's a different. Like my granddad was one of those people. I'm not one of those people. I spent my summers during college riding colts for a ranch that he used to manage in the Panhandle, and I'm better than 98% of Americans at horsemanship, and I can't hold a flame to what those guys do. They're incredible. And but
Oh, it's a low bar for entry. It's an easy skill to learn, but one that you can't even master in a lifetime.
right, it's just the guys who are great at it. It's just and that's something that I had to give up on. I think it's probably one of the things that has allowed me to really embrace the ecological side of it is that I didn't start early enough and I didn't love it enough to really become one of those guys. So being a shitty cowboy or a half-assed cowboy was my path to being a successful grazier, I think. So moving forward, as we find a way, if we can grab all of these assets and start to disseminate them in a way that is more in line with the consciousness of the next generation, I think that's one of the advantages of the American Southeast, because you can just go roll up a reel and your super chill cows are just going to saunter into the next paddock, instead of having to go chase down something in the Arizona mountains, and then dally it up right next to your horse and then take it down 3 miles so you can get to the trailer. Like that's a different breed. That's a different world. That's those guys are badasses in a completely different right. So yeah, I just think that they have their own culture, and that's this. And I find myself a descendant of that culture, but kind of outside of it because I was never very very close to it. I existed tangent to that culture. Some of my cousins are in that culture. So my granddad was in that culture, and I find that to some degree that's one of the last undomesticated. They're probably the last undomesticated Americans, the real Western ranch folks. I think undomesticated is a good way to describe those folks. They're just fiercely independent, and they will be around to carry their tradition as long as it's around, certainly. But the new era of ranching is going to, as we've discussed previously, is going to begin erupting in the eastern side of the country, especially in the southeast. And then maybe it'll continue to start spreading west. I'm seeing ranches in New Mexico and Colorado, all these places start to really get into cross fencing their sections, and eventually we're going to be at the point where the only parts of the world that are of the United States that aren't cross fenced in, say, single wire high tensile are going to be way up in the mountains where it's just you can't get in there in the winter probably, and then farm ground. So I think that's going to constantly expand, but I think the nexus has to take place in areas where you can get 1-2 acres per cow. So you can really get a return on that investment, develop those technologies, develop that experience, develop that high density grazing culture, and it'll spread from there.
Okay. I mean, I can kind of see that. I can see your future. I I struggle with what would happen on the Great Plains, with all the circles of corn and soybeans and all the feedlots, all the huge dairies. Like it's just so strange that the panhandle of Texas is one of the largest milk producing regions in the world. It's really strange. Why is that? It's not because
because it
really rich grass grows there because it's a great climate for dairy cows. It's because it's a good climate for a feedlot.
it's a good climate for a feedlot. It's right next to the Ogallala aquifer that they can pump onto these farm fields, and it's about 4 hours north of one of the biggest oil producing regions on the planet. Obviously, I don't know. It's probably not all refined there, but you're right. It's a great area for a feedlot. It's and to be perfectly honest, I think feedlots are going away. I think by 2050 they'll be illegal. They'll be sunsetted, and the ecological costs will be laid bare. The
See, I'll be 70 years old.
Well, that's an estimation. It could be faster, but I think ecologically and ethically, people won't tolerate it anymore. Especially if we keep having 18,000 cows burn up, and die in one single sitting, where they are cooped up in one barn, sitting on top of an area that used to be teeming with ruminant wildlife, and on top of a pristine natural prairie. That's, I mean, that's the long-term horror of that, in my view, is that we've confined these animals, removed them from their ecological task in an area that used to be an unbelievable biodiverse area of biodiversity.
Well, let's just see here in the last year the stories that have come out of big CAFOs. So, like you just mentioned, 18,000 head. That was a dairy barn fire. Um, there was also one, the heat burst, quote, heat burst a year ago, right at a year ago,
Right, I remember that.
that killed like 8 or 10,000 in Western Kansas. Okay. There may or may not have been a water system that went down during that time period.
But regardless,
Regardless, we there were bad floods around the Hereford Canyon area, a couple
I
like
used to live. I had a two. I grew up on a small ranch on the Tierra Blanca Creek that flows from Hereford, where it starts on the other side of Hereford, goes through Hereford, and then through Canyon to into the Paladaro Canyon.
Okay.
And then our ranch was situated on the Tierra Blanca Creek, and so I know that area very well. And when I was there, between me and Hereford is Buffalo Lake National Wildlife Refuge, and that lake was dead. And you can imagine why.
Oh, probably, yeah. I can imagine. But what I was getting at is like due to all the rain that they've had since the middle of May in that area,
And the inability to soak it up.
there was a feed yard or two that had some flooding and they killed a couple thousand head. And wasn't there also some kind of cold event back in the winter that a bunch died?
Right.
I mean, I'm not remembering that one so clearly, but the floods, the fire, the heat burst, like at some point, we have to take ownership of that. Not you and I, but but we
No,
as
I have to take ownership of that, because my great grandfather built one of the first feedlots in the first feedlot in Vega, Texas. So no, that is me. And my family have been row cropping sugar beets. My family on both sides have been in farming and ranching in the Texas Panhandle for at least my great somewhere back in the day. Grandfather came from somewhere, immigrated to run the Ojo Bravo division of the XIT. So we've been ranching in West Texas, up until me, since 1888. So yeah, I have to take ownership of that. So I absolutely have to put those dead animals on my shoulder and do everything that I can moving forward to as recompense for that. Because if we don't take ownership of it, if I don't take ownership of it, who's going to? Not the insurance companies,
Not in a
not
CBA, not Five Rivers.
no. So the only way to have any recompense of that is to try to is to do everything we can with every breath we have to create conditions for as many life forms as possible over the largest time span that we can. And the way to do that, going back to the beginning of this conversation, is as much herd effect as possible. It is the one tool that we have to create as much life as possible, to create as much microorganism life, to create as much bug life, to create as much reptile, amphibious, bird life. So the only thing that we can do to take responsibility for all of these horrors is to start, and horrors they are, is to really get good at herd effect, to get really, really fucking good at it, and to take it with a religious seriousness. And that is how we can create life for as many people. And I say people, I think probably because I have this disease where I view rocks the same as myself. As
That's
many
not a disease.
as many life forms, conscious or unconscious, depending upon our primitive analysis thereof, as possible.
I like it. Increase biodiversity, increase the chances of success for other organisms.
But not only the width of biodiversity, but the depth of biodiversity. I want as many life forms per square meter as possible, from below the soil up into the sky. So it's not just about the number of different species that you have. It's about the concentration of different species. Because if that carbon cycle is moving really fast, that's lots of food moving into the next phase, and that's lots more things needing to cycle it, and then more things needing to die. So not only do we need to be focused on the width of biodiversity, but also the depth of our biodiversity.
Yes. Underground livestock. I mean, they're far more important than the above ground. I gotta pee real quick. I'll be
Cool.
right back. Oh, sometimes you just need a break.
I feel you, bro. I feel you.
So we talked. You said something about Elon and going to Mars, and terraforming broken ecology. I think was a quote you used, which is probably the title of this episode. I've had a pinned tweet for quite a while on my Twitter profile. I think you know what I'm about ready to say.
No, I don't.
I'm calling out Elon. Like, how are you going to colonize Mars without planning to take ruminant animals with you? We've talked about ultra processed food. I know you don't eat a lot of it. I try not to eat a lot of it. It's for the it seems like almost every time I open up my news feed these days, there's another article about how bad highly processed and ultra processed foods are for people. But the really weird thing is, it's not US based media that's saying this stuff. And it's not US based research. All the research is coming out of Europe and the UK about how bad ultra processed foods are, and how, ultra processed foods, refined grains, refined white sugar are probably contributing to obesity, diabetes, and cancer, and heart disease, and all the other things that we've been dying of at increased rates since the 1950s. And US media just says nothing about it.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, my Spanish father-in-law out there, he's 70 years old. Dude smokes like a chimney. He's gonna live till he's 120. Like it's just like the Spanish diet is, and you go over there and everything's better. The seafood's better. From my experience, the meat was very, very good when I was over there. I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with that, but obviously the pastas and the grains are far better over there. I think that the level of corporate capture we have in this country is a level that far exceeds the rest of the world. I think that's probably one of the things that the Great Eurasian War is about extending that corporate capture over the older cultures on the planet. We really want to make sure that Europe is under our influence instead of the influence of Russia, even though they share uh, a massive land base, and also culturally, it's way more human centric in Europe and also Australia. The culture is way more about enjoying your life rather than this Puritan work ethic, endless ambition, fill up your retirement account that seems to be pervasive throughout American culture. They're just happy to walk to the bakery, walk to the butcher shop, have a fiesta every 2 weeks where, that complete with parades and shit. And it's just so much more about, enjoying the quality of life there. Here it's about this endless cycle of
More, more, more,
profit.
more.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the more urbanized we become, the more it happens, and the more it sinks into our DNA. And except for a small portion of us who are rebelling from that urban vacuousness and putting ourselves back in a position where we can actually enjoy the uh, sensory input of the moment, just to just be with ourselves. It's like there's no time to rest anymore. There's no time to simply be. There's no time, or we haven't taught ourselves to do it. um it's I had a bull. One of my Mashona bulls went lame like 2 weeks ago, and he was lame for like 10 days, and he spent that whole damn time just laying under a tree. And then 2 weeks later he was up and fine. you know it's like he gave himself adequate time to rest and chill, and he wasn't over there sitting there thinking about like all the existential angst that you and I suffer through on a day-to-day basis. Like, oh my god, what am I what's my breed back gonna be this year? Oh my god, I gotta preg check these cows. Oh my god, it's like I gotta go to the dentist. It's like all of that shit.
Oh,
He's just chilling.
got to go catch a few and take into the processor next week. Well, I got to make sure I got all them sold. So, because I don't have enough room for them. If I don't,
Right. And what kind of things do I have to put in place to make sure that I can do that? All of the various we concern ourselves with logistics on a level that the vast majority of existence just doesn't really worry about. That's why fences work for cows. They go to the fence and then they're like, in most cases, they're like, oh, there's a barrier here. Okay, I'll just go this way. That's it's remarkable. The American culture, it has like, it's got to be like a 65 or 70 year hang time where we are just operating on old machinery. In the 50s, when all of that wealth and all of that material abundance first became available, food was still pretty damn good. So you could go to the grocery store and you could get all of these things and all of these new processed materials. And I say materials instead of food because that's what they are. All of these new processed things were still okay. They were made out of good ingredients. We still had some reasonable soil fertility. Cattle were still being fed grass in some cases, and corn that was a little bit higher in nutrient value probably than it is today. So food was better. You could get away with buying a pack of Nabiscos, but now we're still have that same we still have that same belief set that we can still go to and trust. We can trust the grocery store. We can believe what the government says. We can trust our doctors to tell us, the truth all the time because they're out there doing the research. We can believe what the media is saying. We can, and these are all functions of a time that is no longer with us. And so our update period is very, very slow, and we're always way behind. We're seeing the same thing, obviously, with our grazing practices, and although I will say they are accelerating rapidly right now, which is very, very cool. Thanks to a lot of leaders in the industry who are getting very old now, which is going to be interesting to see who can come up to take their place and continue pushing that message forward, going beyond the pioneers into the early adopters, into the humans who can keep that momentum going all the way back, obviously, to the Egyptian Alan Savory that we were talking about earlier. So no, it's we need to find a way. It's better. Well, I'll just say it's better. The faster we can update ourselves without throwing away good information or good practices, the better. And I think we're doing okay with that. And I have to say, I've had a much more positive view of the future since our last podcast, or our first several podcasts. I feel a lot more optimistic about the way things are going. Like, obviously, there's the chance that we'll have massive die off, and humanity will enter a very difficult period. But I think there's probably an equal chance that we'll figure out some way to avoid massive catastrophe. And ultimately, my life has been better now that I've adopted a much more optimistic outlook, and it's certainly opened up a lot more opportunities, I think, indirectly.
Okay. Do you feel like subconsciously,
Pardon me?
it's all right. Do you feel like subconsciously our culture has a drive to outlive and delay the crash? Like, on some level, do you think people understand that the system is failing and falling, and they're just trying to survive as long as they can and delay the inevitable? Or is something else going on? Like, there's so many different factors kind of swirling around in the world, starting to coalesce. The age of our culture, the age of our government, inflationary pressures, the cost of doing business, rising cost of land, the falling value, or the static value of production that's not increasing with inflation. Profit margins shrink, makes land ownership harder and harder and harder. And you and I, being direct to consumer grass fed beef guys, we don't feed at the subsidy trough, but it seems like everybody else in agriculture that's surviving they have to feed at that subsidy trough, and it's a treadmill you can't get off of, because nobody will tell you how to farm. But when you're way in debt to the bank and you've got to have crop insurance to make sure you can make your bank payment, your banker's going to tell you what you're going to be able to plant, and he's going to want to see your crop plan. So I think there's a lot of guys that will say, nobody can tell me how to farm. I'm a lifelong Republican. Trump was the greatest thing ever. They're being told what to plant by their banker and their crop guy and their crop insurance guy and their crop consultant. They're being told what to plant, what to put on it, and when to do it. And we have the freedom. We can go graze however we want to. There's no grazing police going to come arrest you or me. If there was, I might have spent a couple nights in the lockup because pasture overused a little bit too much here, or not effectively used over there.
2 points have been deducted from your license.
I'm glad there's not grazing police. If there was, well, they probably wouldn't bother me because they'd have a lot of other work to do before they'd come mess with me. So
this is why throughout time they've had cultures that every 7 years or whatever, they forgive debts. Our culture doesn't have that. We have bankruptcy, which is kind of a poor version of that.
Get off your record.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like yeah, you can go bankrupt, but then you can't borrow anything moving forward. I'm sure there was some hangover from that in previous cultures as well. It's like, well, I just had to forgive a very large debt from you, Jezediah. Like, I'm not about to turn around and loan you 150 shekels or whatever. I'm sure I mixed cultures and currencies there. I don't but to some degree we have to have some sort of forgiveness, and then the absolute tyranny of banks has to go away, especially banks that don't have to keep any money on hand, and especially since we don't really even use money at all anyway. It's all just pretend. But your original question was, does our culture subconsciously is our culture subconsciously trying to outlive or outweight the crash? And what I would say is that the older I get, the more I recognize that the gulf between people who are awake to some degree, and I hate to use this phraseology, but I don't have anything more sophisticated. The gulf between people who are awake and the gulf between people who are completely asleep, and those are the two ends of the spectrum, is enormously wide. It's enormously wide. And I think that there is a 10 to 15% portion of the population that's like, oh, this isn't working. I got to do something different. And those are the people who are on your TikTok, your Instagram homesteading. Who wants to move into the country in 20 acres and grow chickens and, get your kids out of school? Like, that's those people. And they have their consciousness has, maybe is a little bit more unfettered than other people. And I don't say this in a judgmental way. I'm trying to do it in a very analytical way. But the vast majority of people, and I say this because I think for a long time I was kind of overshadowed by this demon, even if they have some sort of subconscious understanding that things are going to go badly, are just going to party it out until they do. I think this is one of the fundamental motivations I had for a music career that I was really chasing hard from the time I was like 20 until I was 28. So the reason I played guitar 4 to 5 hours a day, I thought it was because, well, it's because I love music. It's because this is what I want to do. But it's because I had this gut feeling that the world was going to end. I had graduated college in 2009 when there were no opportunities for anybody to do anything. And I was like, well, if I'm going to be fucked my entire life, which is what I think a lot of people feel, especially if you have a shit ton of student debt, then I'm just going to enjoy myself until it all runs out, and then I just rationalized it away, saying that it was because I really love music. So no, I didn't love music. I loved smoking weed and playing guitar and avoiding reality. Like, that's what I loved to do. And when I had a kid, that all went to, excuse the phrase, up in smoke. And
motherfucker in the first 2 minutes of the podcast. Like, I guess everything is on the table at this point.
Oh yeah, well, it's this is going to be probably one of our more fun episodes. I feel like in a way it's like the Joe Rogan Duncan Trussell recurring conversation, just the different permutations thereof. But
wait till I show up in your yard with all my equipment and furry costumes.
Oh, that will be fun. That will be great. Can we please do that not in summer?
Yes, definitely not in summer.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Like, okay, I have all this stuff to do outside off-grid podcast. Like, I can go to the cow pasture now and I could sit down with 4 people and do a podcast.
Oh, that's awesome, dude. Have you done that yet?
No, I haven't. We're working up to it, trying to get some friends on the schedule. I've done a couple of tests and tests have turned out good. So we're going to do another test, and hopefully that'll make a good episode. And, but no, hopefully over the next couple of weeks, I'll get some deals hammered out with some sponsors and get a few bucks in the billfold that I can blow on podcast stuff. I want to get a tent, like an easy up canopy that I can take with my big logo on it,
like African safari style.
Yeah, so I can show up with, like, a couple chairs, a table, and a box of junk and this canopy, and just pop the canopy open, throw a table under it, some chairs, put all my stuff, hook up microphones, and go.
Put all your sponsored stuff like arranged carefully in the background, like.
Yeah, that's I'm gonna try. I want to update the studio down here, make it to where I can have guests down here in the studio. Change out the green screen, like. Put a shelf behind me and have some of my knickknacks and stuff on the shelf. Some of my cool hats, some of memorabilia that people have given me or I've accumulated over the years. We're not making any major changes. Just trying to take things to the next level.
Nice. I want to bring it full circle real quick about the transitioning from music into going back to my ranching roots. And I think, but the thing I want to say that because so I don't look like a total stoner loser. It's like, and which to some degree that's what I was in my early 20s. And when I had a kid, suddenly the future that was very nihilistic before, subconsciously nihilistic, was worth living for. And suddenly I searched for meaning. I had some sort of I had a massive psychological shift, and suddenly looking for meaning and purpose was sort of paramount to my existence. And that's sort of, and it's funny because I never was interested in being on social media with my music, and never was interested in putting myself out there. And even when I only had 10 cows and was weirdly moving them around 4 times a day in very conspicuous areas in Central Oregon, I was still interested in putting up a TikTok, and that thing took off wildly, which I think is a great indication that that's what I was supposed to be doing. It was much more imbued with meaning and purpose than my music in any way. And has been a hugely important part of my growth in this industry, obviously, and has certainly given a lot of meaning and purpose and opened a lot of doors. And that's actually one of the things I want to talk about. Remember when TikTok was awesome? When it was like you and me and Reverend Wild Ranch?
Yeah,
Like it was just
3 years ago.
Yeah, it was like March of 2020. It was just like us, and it was just like us absorbing hate from conventional agriculture people like all day, and just saying all this wild stuff on this crazy Chinese app. It was like the Wild West. It's really calm. It's really tamed itself out, and everybody's growth on the app has just like it stopped, just completely stopped. But we were going bananas there for a second. Those are the good old days, man.
Yeah. I was thinking about the good old clock app last night, and
Clock app.
Twitter's a legacy, not Twitter, Facebook's a legacy platform.
Yeah.
Instagram's a legacy platform, and they're, and YouTube, legacy platform. They're trying to innovate and copy what they think has made TikTok successful. But what has made TikTok successful is the algorithm. I mean, that's what's driving it, and what content that it shows you and how it shows you content. And I kind of understand on a basic level of how it works. Like, everybody has a user profile based on your data, based on what you've liked, who you follow, and what hashtags you follow. So the algorithm sorts all that out and starts displaying you content. And what I think is great is, you can make some really engaging content and hit 2 or 3 different audiences by hashtags and get them sucked into your page and get them sucked into your thing. But what TikTok represents to me right now, and I was kind of thinking about this last night, is it represents the velocity of information. It represents people's truth. And those are the videos that do really well, is when somebody gets on there and speaks their truth about thing, whether it's a thing that happened to them or a thing that's happening in the world. It's people passionately speaking their truth. It's also, I mean, you hear anything that's going to be on mainstream media tomorrow is on TikTok right now.
Right.
Somebody on there talking about it right now. And once one person's talking about it, there'll be 10 people talking about it, and you'll know everything there is to know before the mainstream media puts their slant out tomorrow. And it's also dangerous. There's also a danger in platforms like that, anything that can be used for good can also be misused for evil. And I thought of this earlier. We were throwing around some words, and in some languages that are not as sophisticated as English, okay, the word tool and weapon are the same thing. Argument and war are the same word. So language has a tremendous power to shape thought. and the spread of ideas and information. We were promised with the internet, information will be free. Information will be free. Well, information's free as long as you're willing to give up your data to get it and your personal information, it seems like. And that's true for TikTok too. They're 100% mining your information to try to sell you stuff.
Right. Yeah, and also to some degree, information is free, but you have to put out the work to process it. That's certain, and as you should. I'm certainly grateful for the opportunity to do it, and it's really interesting how before we had TikTok and we had this hyper velocity of information accessibility, we had nothing to juxtapose the legacy media with. So now we see 10 different perspectives on TikTok about an event that's happening. We get to process it on our own, take away our own perspective, and then the next day you see it on some sort of like New York Times is like, RFK Jr. says is misinformation about vaccines, and it's like, oh, I actually saw what he said yesterday,
that's not really
that's
what he
bullshit.
said.
And we see that with countless things, and so their slant is it only works on old people now. It's as we were discussing previously, the jig is up now. They're going to try to regulate. And in Canada, by the way, they just passed a regulation that says you can do that. They can regulate your podcast to ensure that 30% of your content, or something like this, I may have this wrong, but it's basically right. 30% of your your content is promoting Canadian-centric information or something like that. And obviously that's going to be interpreted to like, if you have anti-Canada messages, you have to take it down. So suddenly they're going to have people self-policing anything that might be like anti-Canada. And I think the United States had something that went through kind of like that. It passed one of the houses, but not the other, something like that. Passed the House, but didn't pass the Senate, something like that. But yeah, ultimately we have that information, and we have the ability to process it ourselves in a way that we haven't had in a long time. Dude, it is mind-blowing to watch my 70-year-old dad try to lean, who is a doctor, by the way, to try to lean on what he learns on NPR. And I'm like, Dad, like, no. It's like
It's government funded propaganda.
Exactly. It's bullshit. And I can't tell him that. I can't, like he and I just
NPR's been a trusted source of news for 50 years.
Ever since I was in residency in 1963, it's whatever. It's like, but I love my dad. I love my dad.
That's my dad's 7 most dangerous words in agriculture. We have always done it this way.
Right. I mean, certainly, there is to some degree of truth to the notion that tradition is the answer to problems that we forgot about. Yeah, that's true. That's why we always need to be existing with one foot in what works and the other foot in something new. They call that the zone of proximal growth. So we have to be existing in the zone of proximal growth all the time, and that requires us to be processing our own information. How do you know that when you're in the zone of proximal growth? Well, if you're performing an activity, it's when you lose consciousness of self. That's how you know you're in the zone of proximal growth. But when you're analyzing an endeavor, you're in the zone of proximal growth. I think primarily by that slight feeling of discomfort that you have as you move into a bigger version of yourself. And you can't do that without the ability to process information. So I hope that, and I think that's maybe one of the things that all of these social media platforms are giving us, particularly TikTok, are giving us, is reawakening our ability to process and analyze information that has laid dormant because of the spoon-fed mush of propaganda that we've gotten from the mainstream media over the last 50 years. So I think that as you said, certainly some evil can be done and will be done with regard to the availability and the speed of information that's moving faster today. But I think a great deal of positivity is coming out of it for sure.
Yes. Yes. Positive change, I think. Oh.
And that's it, and we like you and I, like you and me and Reverend Wild Ranch and Trevor when he's not acting like Donald Trump, um, and several other people who are have big followings on social media have done more for the regenerative movement than all of the land grant universities in this country combined. And I believe that fully. I think there are billions of dollars worth of PhDs out there who only exist in their own little system and go to their own little conferences and go have their own little farm talks with the people who wear the same hats that they do and have done less for the proliferation of the regenerative movement than a bunch of assholes on a social media platform just making shit randomly, just pointing a camera and talking about stuff. And the beautiful thing about that is, like, everything on social media is peer reviewed, all of it. Every video that you put out, every video that I put out. That's why our grazing has gotten so much better, so much faster than people who are out there just reading whatever research comes out of the university that's funded by whatever.
Or just trying to figure it out by yourself in a vacuum.
Exactly. Because you have people out there poking holes in the weakest part of your argument all the time. And so anything that's left is the resilient, coherent, congruous, strong remains of your grazing philosophy. And if you do this over enough years, then and you test it, you get critiqued, you go back, you test it, you get critiqued, you go back, you end up with something that works pretty goddamn good. And I think that's where we're at with social media, and that that's I think that's really true, actually. That all social media is peer reviewed. It's maybe peer reviewed by people who don't have an acronym after their name, but it's peer reviewed by the wisdom of the masses, which I think is probably more valuable, and it gets more people involved in the conversation. It gets more people actively thinking about it. And it actually creates a cool factor and a sex factor that is not available in the land grant universities because there are personalities attached to it. People follow personalities. People don't follow brands. People don't go. People don't follow like the Texas A&M TikTok account. Really, there's nothing interesting that comes out of that. There's nothing interesting that comes out of the Chevrolet TikTok account. There's nothing interesting that comes out of any of these big brands. That they just treat it like a goddamn commercial. Like, people want to follow personalities. They want to get to know the weird little twerks of the people that they're following. It just so happens that the people that they're following have this obsession with some various thing, whether it's makeup or old guitars or grazing or whatever, and it's all peer reviewed, all over the longer the time horizon that you peer review it with this huge mass of people, the better it's going to be. And I think that's one of the reasons we've seen this huge influx in regenerative agriculture, is because not only are more people interested, but more people are testing it, more people are critiquing it, so it's getting better and better and better. Like, I'm going to have to stop right there, because I think that's just a great place to stop. I felt myself almost talking shit on some other people, so I'm going to not do that.
Okay, that's fair.
So organizations.
Yeah. And so a couple things that came to mind. It's one thing to see somebody making a viral video talking about something cool, or talking about a product that they bought, and it's in a sponsored or an affiliate deal. I'll watch those a lot of times. But if it's a Chevrolet ad, scroll past. If it's sponsored content from a company, I am going to scroll past you on social media, probably 99 times out of 100. Because if I want to know your propaganda, I'll come to your site and look at it. Like, I will go to your website and look at it. I promise. Like Chevy, Ford, Dodge, Jeep. Yeah, I look at your websites because I like to keep track of what trucks are around. Okay.
And it's so easy to hide propaganda behind a brand, and it's much more difficult to do it in a personality. Like, we all have our personal slants. We all have our biases. Everybody knows that,
Yes.
but it becomes nefarious, malevolent, and insidious when it's behind a big recognized brand. Dodge, Yellowstone doesn't ranch. It's like, okay, whatever. And you're right. It's like that shit's boring because you're interacting with an abstraction. When it's a person, like it's a person. Like that's what we're built to do. We're built to interact with a person. We're built to hear a story. We're built to see what a person is saying. That's way better, way cooler, way more exciting. Um, and like of the top 100 TikTok accounts or Instagram accounts, 98 of them are people. Two of them are brands.
And there's a couple good brands that have really great social media managers for some platforms. Like I think Wendy's Twitter is always lit. Oklahoma Department of Wildlife, like whoever runs their Twitter account is awesome. If you
Because
don't,
it has a human-like personality.
right, and it says stupid things like that a person would, and it's not just public service announcements. Like nobody wants to see that. Hey, there's a reason you have to pay to sponsor public service announcements because nobody's willingly going to go watch that content. I get it. Being engaging is hard. Like I struggle on social media to make engaging posts that are positive. Like anybody can make a negative post and get some mileage out of it. Anybody can talk crap on something else, a system, a thing, whatever. Tell somebody they're doing it wrong. It's easy to get attention that way. It's much harder to get attention asking questions or saying, this is what I'm doing and this is why it works for me. And I think that's why, your concept of quote peer review is important. And in some ways, Reddit's been around for a long time. And Reddit was really cool because it was like a bulletin board, like an old forum, an old BBS. But instead of everything being in chronological order, like old threads, comments get upvoted. So those get displayed first. So the more useful stuff is bumped towards the top of the thread. It's, a lot more easily accessible, but everybody else's opinion was still there. And you could just see how popular it was with the community.
Right.
So TikTok is a lot like that. TikTok is basically that for video format, for short video format. As a user, you get to interact with this content. Okay, did I like it? Did I watch it? Was it meaningful? Was it useful? And the algorithms, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they all work this way. But it's, what level of interaction did you do with this piece of content? Did you watch it all the way through? Did you make a comment? Did you leave an emotion react? Did you share it with your friends? And all of these things have weight. And the more of those things are done, the more weight you get and the more people get to see your stuff.
Right.
And I think that's really important. I mean,
very democratic.
I have worked for years to build a small, loyal following on Facebook. And the amount of followers I got on TikTok in the first year blew my mind. It blows my mind that I can make a video about nothing and 3,000 people will watch it. I can make the most thought out post on Facebook that should test well, should perform well, and it'll get like 4 shares and 150 impressions. So I kind of wonder, where's my time being best spent on social media? Where are those attention hours best being spent? Are they best being spent getting my thoughts and ideas in front of the widest audience possible? Breaking into as many new circles as possible? It's hard to do on the legacy platforms.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to do on the legacy platforms. And plus, if you look at the forward projections of what's going to matter, it's the people on the legacy platforms. I mean, they matter right now. Only old people use Facebook with the veracity that we did when it first came out. And no offense, old people, but it's the people who will be running the show in 20 years. They're on TikTok. People who will be running the show in 30 years. They're on TikTok right now. And as things continue to evolve, they'll be on whatever new thing comes out, and whatever virtual reality shit we stumble ourselves into. I mean, that's going to be profoundly important. I think that there was a bank or something out there that was lending opening accounts or lending credit lines or something to Instagram and TikTok influencers, and they waited. It was 20 times more weight to each Instagram follower than they did to a TikTok follower. And that's probably based on how engaged they actually are, how much more likely they are to spend money, how much more likely they are to, proliferate your message. So I don't know where I found that. I'm sure you could Google that, but that's kind of how I weight my Instagram versus my TikTok importance in terms of making that decision of where's the most important place to create content. But luckily, it's the same damn thing for me. I can just make a video in CapCut. That's the program that I use to make the video. Then I'll download it, then throw it up on Instagram, write a caption, copy the caption, then throw it up on TikTok, paste the caption, then throw it up on LinkedIn, paste the caption, and call it good. And that's I mean, I don't treat any of those differently. Maybe if I was a more refined or sophisticated person, I would treat each of them differently. But like, this is me. Like, this is what I do. This is the thing that I'm going to do. And what I am going
to spend your time and energy.
Right. But I do recognize that it's very, very important. And I've also been able to identify that for me, what matters is not necessarily, like, there are a ton of people like I'll make a confession to you. I don't give a fuck about soil health. Like, I don't care about it. It doesn't matter to me, because if you graze properly, soil health will take care of itself. I am not interested in the minutia of what's happening under the soil. I'm a firm believer that if you do everything in your power, which is to affect what happens above the ground, the below ground part will take care of itself. And no matter how much you know about what's happening above or below ground, there's always way more than you're aware of. So from that perspective, I am not going to get on TikTok and be like, there's the soil, it's good for it to be healthy, because we see a huge proliferation of people making that really basic low-hanging fruit content. Ever since we started moving our cows once every 3 days, we've seen a huge increase in biodiversity, on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. So the thing that's been really important for me is like, have an original insight. If you have an original insight that maybe you heard somewhere, or you put it together through synthesizing other pieces of information, but if you have an original insight that is relevant to your life and that might be relevant to other people's lives, then use that to be a vehicle for teaching. Like, for me, the one that I used the other day, it's probably been said before, but what I recognize is like these dung beetles are, in one fell swoop, are performing multiple functions. So I realized that the more functions that one activity provides, or more functions that one activity let's say provides, the more functions that one activity serves, the more elegant of a solution it is. And the more elegant a solution, the more effective it is going to be. And those are going to be the solutions that stand the test of time. So that was the original insight. And what did I do? I used it to talk about dung beetles. Now, there are plenty of people out there who probably made videos about dung beetles, like, this is a dung beetle, it eats poop and it puts it under the ground. Like, that's great. But what is that saying? The original insight there is that it is performing a very elegant, sophisticated activity that creates a positive output in a number of at a number of levels of analysis. And so, like, there's a difference between, this is a dung beetle, it is important for soil health, and the original or semi-original insight that I can add to that. Because if I'm just making a video about soil health, I'm not even there. There's no me. I'm replaceable by any other number of ranchers or farmers or soil health people by just relaying information. Like, so not only do I have to have my personality, not only do I have to have the information, but I also need to add an original insight. And if you are using your brain properly and being sufficiently in the moment, you ought to have several of these original insights per day. And the second that you do, make a video about it. And the more people who do that, the more good information will come out. And so that's been my trick for social media, is like the more original your insight, the more that you can add that insight into something relevant that's happening. That's what talking heads are supposed to do. But all they do instead of adding original insight is provide some sort of slant or propaganda, or to satisfy the power structures that currently exist. So original insight, I think, is possibly the missing piece in the legacy media that is being provided in TikTok and Instagram, and the particularly salient accounts. So in summation, I don't give a fuck about soil health.
Okay. I mean, I see your point. But we got to wrap up, man. Where can people find you?
Just look in the sky. I'm all around you. I'm like Mufasa in The Lion King. I will never not be with you. But for a more conventional answer, Fire and Salt on TikTok, Fire and Salt Beef on Instagram, fireandsalt.com, and hello@fireandsalt.com if you want to send me an email.
Very cool, man. I appreciate your time today.
Oh man, it's been a lot of fun.
All right, you got anything you want to close us out?
Remember that your death is coming very quickly, and enjoy your life.
All right, that's it. Have a good week. Goodbye.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our podcast. We'd also love to hear your thoughts, so leave us a review if you haven't already. And don't forget to check out the Q&A and the polls on Spotify. Your support helps us bring more enlightening conversations and fresh stories from the world of farming and ranching. Thank you for listening to Ranching Reboot, your favorite regenerative ag podcast.